So the focus of this competition and impact shows how academia and PhDs are changing. And while it's a good change, international studies have been left behind in comparison to other disciplines. When I started my PhD, I realised that there were few opportunities for networking, either to collaborate on research or to help with creating impact. So there was a gulf between me, my research, and the direction academia had to go. So my solution to this problem was to combine networking, research, and an impact together, and that's what I'm going to talk to you today about. So to do this, I formed a new research association called TAPVA, Terrorism and Political Violence Association. It currently has academic members, nationally, internationally, and partnerships with think tanks and links with policymakers. TAPVA's main focus is to drive high-impact research through such partnerships. By ascertaining the research needs of policy community, we can improve research and trace impact. This form is an example of our engagement with the policy community. We had meetings in the Home Office, Chatham House, and Foreign Policy Centre and Foreign Office. So to quote the head of the counter-terrorism unit in the Home Office about TAPVA, he said this association has the potential to create a new research centre to rival the main institutions, St Andrews in the north, King's in the south, Leeds in the centre. So not only has TAPVA created impact, it has provided me the vast opportunities for my own research. My research is on how terrorism ends. It might sound like a simple question, but the big problem with this is this word end. And it goes to recidivism. Recidivism talks about, or is basically meaning, to what extent can we talk about terrorism ending permanently? So is there a return? Is there a chance for reoffending? So this is what I'm looking at in this broader debate. Previous discussion and research on recidivism and how terrorism ends focused generally on the individual and collective disengagement process. Disengagement refers to how terrorist behaviour declines. Now the important aspect with this is the behaviour, declining behaviour and terrorist behaviour does not necessarily require a change in attitudes. So you can still be supportive of the goals, you can still be radicalised, but the important thing is the behaviour has changed. So as I said, the two most areas of research have been on individual and collective. So to give you an example, individual recidivism would be the incentives that former terrorists have had. For example, in Saudi Arabia, when they get released from prison, they get a house, a car, nice tax benefits, they even get an arranged marriage. And so all of these are to encourage recidivism, to prevent going back to terrorist behaviour. Collective disengagement, an example would be the politicisation, entering political structures. These are all different forms of measuring recidivism, the chances of returning to terrorism. However, there is a problem that underpins both of these individual and collective focuses, is that they don't value specifically the role of attitudinal change, because they say that behaviour, you don't need to change attitudes because the important thing is changing behaviour, either through coercion or through incentives. So it doesn't matter if you change the attitudes of terrorists. Also, you don't need to address the root causes of conflict, because the causes of conflict are not linked to how terrorist campaigns have ended. So then obviously that relates to how society is a factor. It's not necessarily explored. It's seen as some static entity, which is not seen as how it actually shapes society and terrorism in the context of terrorism. The problems with this approach is that the individual disengagement process doesn't take into account when militant groups, when terrorists when they leave prison, doesn't take into account their life cycle. For example, when you leave prison, you're most likely not going to reoffend anyway, specifically for terrorism. In terms of the group disengagement process, Groups will splinter, new members will join from society at large. So the focus of the individual and collective level is limited by the focus, and so you need to expand that to look at society and the impact of society on agents, new generations essentially. The problem, once again, with this behavioural focus is very important in terms of the extreme. When you look at Sri Lanka, for example, it can lead to aggressive policies that have high intensity violence, and civilians are obviously taught the end of that. So this is one of the extremes, but then in the case of the IRA prisoners in the UVF, these people were left out of prison, assuming that the actuals weren't changing, but to what extent what are they saying to the new generations, the communities there? And so basically the existence of this discourse, to what extent does this create and encourage new, younger people to join terrorism? So this is the problem, I think. So I argue that we need to refocus on the role of active society and causes of terrorism, tracking changes in society. Attitudes are transmitted to new generations. Grievances can be internalised. So basically you don't need to be actively involved in terrorism, but these grievances can be built up through generations and then explode when the opportunity arises. I mean, we just have to look at some examples in history, for example, the rise in the IRA in the 1960s to show this. Thus, changing attitudes and addressing causes is important for what I would call social disengagement. And key to social disengagement is analysing intergenerational relations. And to explore this concept, I'll look at Northern Ireland. Now, the provisional IRA's disengagement process was involved in two stages. First, in 1998, where you had the declarative disengagement, where the peace process was launched. And secondly, in 2008, where you had the decommissioning, which we would call collective disengagement. However, ironically, in the literature, they say that IRA is an example of terrorism ended. However, since 2008, the violence in Northern Ireland has been increasing. So how can we really talk about the end of terrorism, or the decline of terrorism as well, specifically in terms of how it's increasing recently? So we need to explore the extent that there has been social disengagement, and I will conduct fieldwork in Northern Irish communities to explore this issue in two aspects. Incidentally, TAPWA provides access to former prisoners and to policymakers, helping to illustrate how my activities in the research and networking augments the potential for research. So firstly, it is important to assess the extent the violence is driven by the previous generation and to analyse the extent the previous disengagement processes, i.e. prisoners getting released from the prison, has it worked? So this will demonstrate whether attitudinal change should be more of a significant part of disengagement for prisoners when they've been released. Secondly, I will explore whether the current militant groups that have been able to continue and develop mobilisation structures. So essentially, is this a fad that has just been driven on from the previous momentum? Or have they actually put roots in community, and these roots and these structures can help maintain and develop and build violence? So the structural disengagement framework will enhance our understanding of the extent terrorism has ended and given us better predictors of recidivism. So building on the individual level and the collective level, we would actually be able to judge the extent terrorism has declined in communities. It would encourage governments to take a holistic view to countering terrorism, as it would put people's grievances back in focus. The root causes will matter. It will also empower non-state actors, such as community groups, to help in building the communities and encouraging the discourses of peace. Thanks very much.